Hello, in this video I'll show you how to make an amazing double exposure effect by combining two images to come up with something that looks like this. Now we'll be using Photoshop to get the effect, but it's very similar to what you'd see in a traditional film-based double exposure where the light from one scene is added to another. So if you're thinking of shooting your own images for this, bear in mind that light areas can only stay the same or get lighter, which means that strong graphic shapes like this profile here work well when combined with texture, because the shape of the head here is already going to be defined because this area of lightness around here isn't going to get any darker, so we can add our trees over the head to come up with something that looks like this. So I'm going to show you how to combine these two images using the screen blend mode, and also how to use smart objects in combination with camera raw to give you maximum control over the mix of tones that you're going to get. So I'm going to start by opening up these two files. So I'm going to hold Command or Control, that's Command on a Mac, Control on a PC, and I'm going to click on both of them here in Adobe Bridge, and I'm going to right click and choose Open in Camera Raw when I have both of those files selected, and they'll pop open in the Camera Raw plugin. And I'll start by just tweaking the tones on the portrait here. I'm going to bring the contrast up slightly, we'll set that to about +13, and I'll also just lift the shadows a little bit, we'll bring that up to +10, and just add a touch of crispness with the clarity slider, we'll bring that up to about +18. Then I'll go to the other image and I'll tweak the sliders again. This time I'm going to drop exposure slightly to about -0.9, and I think we'll just lift the shadows again, we'll bring that up until we can see some detail in these darkest areas to about +50 I think. And again I think we'll up the clarity. Let's bring that up to about +53. So now I'm pretty happy with those initial tweaks. I'm just going to click select all at the top left here, and I'm just going to go to my workflow options and make sure I've got my depth set to 16 bits for maximum quality. And you'll see my open images button down here. If I hold shift, that switches to open objects, and this allows me to open my images into Photoshop as smart objects, which means I can send them back into Camera Raw whenever I like, and we'll make use of that later. So I'm going to hold shift and click open objects to open both files into Photoshop as smart objects. And once both images are open in Photoshop, I'm going to copy my trees on top of the portrait. So I'm going to go to Window, Layers to bring up my Layers panel. Then right click the layer here in the Layers panel and choose Duplicate Layer. In the Destination Document settings here, I can just select the other image and then hit OK to copy that layer over, and you'll see it sitting on top of the portrait now. Now to get my double exposure effect, I'm simply going to click the blend mode drop down here at the top of the layers panel and choose screen, and you'll see how that blends my two images together, and this is multiplying the lighter areas, so you'll see we're able to fill the shape of the head with the texture of the trees. And it may be, if you're using your own images, that this is all you need to do. The rest of the technique is really just fine-tuning the effect. So to start with, I'm going to reposition my trees, which of course is one area in which Photoshop has the advantage over traditional film-based double exposures, because when you're shooting them in camera you don't have the opportunity to reposition the different elements later, but we have that opportunity in Photoshop. Simply by hitting Command or Control and T, we can enter transform mode, and then we can reposition and resize and rotate our layer. I'm just going to hold shift and drag the corner here of the bounding box to make that layer slightly smaller, then drag it over, and I can drag outside of the bounding box to rotate the layer. So I'm going to bring it around somewhere around about there and position it over here, just trying to judge how the trees are looking over the face. I think I'll just drag it slightly smaller. Somewhere around about there I think is going to work well. I can hit enter to apply that transformation, and you can see it's really starting to take shape now, but I think the colours aren't really working. They're pretty distracting, and I think it just looks a little bit of a mess. So I think the best thing to do is convert it to black and white, and this is often the case with double exposures. So I'm going to click the create adjustment layer icon here at the bottom of the layers panel and choose black and white, and I'm just going to leave it at the default settings and then just close my properties panel And now we've got rid of the color, I think the whole image is looking pretty flat, so it could do with a boost in contrast. I'm going to do that by adding another adjustment layer. This time we're going to use curves, and I'm going to click on the line there and drag upwards to add 1 point up near the top half of the line, and then click down here and add a second point and drag that down to create a shallow S-shaped curve line like that. And that's just going to give me a nice boost in contrast. I can fine tune the line there. The more pronounced the curve, the stronger the contrast. I think that's working well, just like that. Now I think we'd be able to see the leaves better if we darken down the face. So I can go back to my 2 layers here at the bottom, and because we open them as smart objects, I can double click these thumbnails here to send them back into Camera Raw. So I'm going to double click the thumbnail here on the portrait to open that file back in Camera Raw, and I'm going to go to the tone curve panel, which is the second one along here. And I'm going to make another S-shaped curve. This time I'm going to make it bottom heavy like this, just to darken down those shadows while still pinning back the highlights, so we're not darkening down the face too much. So I think somewhere around about there. And I'll hit OK to apply that. And that's looking much stronger now. So you can see the power smart objects give you to transfer images to and fro between Photoshop and Camera Raw. It's worth noting that if you're a Photoshop Creative Cloud subscriber, you have the option now under the filter drop down here to use Camera Raw as a filter, which is very useful, but I'm going to use smart objects instead for this tutorial. Now I think I could just do with tweaking the highlights here, particularly on the forehead. You can see we've lost a little bit of detail there, so I'm just going to double click that curves layer and then drag the top point of my line down just to darken down the highlights slightly, and that's better. And I've also noticed that we have a few distracting leaves over the eye here. I'd like to tone those down, and again I can do this by sending the layer back to Camera Raw. I'm going to send my trees back to Camera Raw this time, but before I do that, I'm just going to hold Alt and click the eye icon here just to hide all of my other layers. And I'm doing this to note the position of the leaves that are covering the eye. So you can see it's these leaves here that I need to fix. So I'm just going to double click the thumbnail here on the leaves layer, and that will open that image back into Camera Raw. And this time I'm going to use the adjustment brush. So I'm going to grab that from the toolbar up here, and this allows me to paint in different selections across my image. So I can choose some settings over here for my brush. I'm going to bring exposure back to about -1.9 and also drop the highlights back to about -40. And then I'm just going to paint over the offending leaves, which are these few leaves here. So I can use the left and right square bracket keys to resize my brush tip and then just paint over that area. And you'll see how that works, and that allows me to darken down those leaves. If I need to see where I've painted, I can hit Y to view my mask overlay. I think that's looking good. I think that's all I need to do there. So I'm going to hit OK to bring that image back into Photoshop, and notice how the eye changes. Now, still working on the eye, I'm going to double click the other thumbnail again to send that image back into Camera Raw. Let's just zoom in closer to that eye. And I'm going to use the adjustment brush again. This time I'm going to use it to lighten the whites in the eye. So I'll grab the adjustment brush, and the tool will remember the last used settings, so I can double click those sliders to reset them. And this time I'm going to up exposure to about +0.6, and also up highlights will bring that up to about +40. And I'm just going to paint over that eye again. I can use this square bracket keys on my keyboard to resize my brush tip. See how that just lifts the eye. Of course, I can tweak those settings if I want to make it slightly lighter. I think somewhere around there is working good. So I'm going to hit OK to apply that. And now the eye's looking much stronger. In fact, I'll just show you quickly through the history how with a couple of tweaks we can really make that area much better just by tweaking each of those individual layers in Camera Raw with the adjustment brush. Now I also need to improve this area here where the shoulder overlaps the trees, and I'm just going to make it completely white. I could of course do this with the brush tool, but instead I'm just going to double click the thumbnail there to open my image back into Camera Raw. I'm going to grab the graduated filter and set the exposure to +4, and then I'm just going to drag up a couple of times from here I can just hold shift when I drag to keep my lines horizontal. And I'm also going to drag in over here a couple of times. You see that quickly just allows me to make those areas completely white, and I'm happy with that. And that will just whiten up the bottom and the side of my image. And that's much better. Next, I'm going to add a toning effect to introduce a few color shifts to my black and white image. So I'm going to highlight the top layer, then click the Create Adjustment Layer icon. And this time I'm going to use Gradient Map. I'm just going to click the drop down here and then click the flyout menu. And you'll see we have a set down here called Photographic Toning. I'm just going to replace my gradients with those. And you'll see this gives me lots of different toning effects. And these relate to traditional chemical-based techniques. So you can just click through these to try out these different effects. There's one here called Sepia Midtone somewhere that I quite like. There we go. So I'm going to use that one. Now to finish off, I'm just going to clone out these distracting little elements here where the background in one of the images is showing through. So I'm going to click the Create New Layer icon to give me a new empty layer. Let's just close my properties panel. I'm going to grab the clone tool, and in the options up here I'm going to choose sample all layers, which means I can clone on this empty layer while sampling all of the layers below. Let's just zoom into that area, just holding Command or Control and the space bar to zoom in, and then I'm going to set my opacity to 100%, resize my brush using those left and right square bracket keys again. I'm going to hold Alt to sample the background and then just paint over that area to remove those distracting elements. That's all we need to do. And I'm going to finish off with a little dodging and burning. So I'm going to hold Alt and click the new layer icon again. And this will bring up my new layer options. I have this option here to choose a mode. So I'm going to set overlay and then check this option here, fill with overlay neutral color, and hit OK, and you'll see that gives me a new layer filled with grey set to the overlay blend mode. Now I can paint with white or black on this layer to dodge or burn my image, to lighten or darken different areas. So I'm going to grab the brush tool, I'm going to set my opacity to 10%, I can hit 1 to set it to 10%, and I can hit D to set my colours to black and white, and I can paint with black to darken. So let's just move over this area here, let's just zoom out slightly as well. And I'm just going to paint over this area here just to darken it down slightly, see if we can reveal a bit more detail in that area, and also over the shoulder here. So this is all just about fine-tuning the blend of the two images. So I'm going to carry on until I'm happy. And I can hit X to flip to white and then paint to lighten areas if I like as well. I think that's looking good. And that's a great technique you can use for dodging and burning on any image you like. Now the last thing I'm just going to do is crop in slightly tighter. So I'm going to grab the crop tool. I'm going to hold Shift and Alt, which will allow me to crop from the center while moving all of my sides in at the same amount. So I'm just going to crop to about there, hit enter to apply, and that's my finished image. So there we have it. That's how you can create double exposures by combining two different images and then using different adjustment layers to tweak the tones before retouching any distracting elements and doing a little bit of dodging and burning, and that's it. Thanks very much for watching.